So I always talk about this balance between braking and propulsion. And so I just kind of think back to, okay, well, what do the bulk of my first programs look like? Especially when somebody comes back and they just played, say, pro basketball or pro soccer for 8, 9, 10 months. Reverse sled drives. And I got 5 or 6 different variations depending on what that person needs. But a lot of sessions, we're going to start with that.
That was Mike Robertson, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week's guest is Mike Robertson. Mike is the co-owner of IFAST in Indianapolis and has over 20 years of experience training athletes from pros to everyday clients. He's the host of the Physical Preparation Podcast and is a respected educator and field leader in the human performance training space. On today's show, Mike talks about the nature and evolution of his programming to help athletes feel, move, and play their best. He talks about his favorite big lift variations. He speaks on braking and propulsive ideas and balance to help athletes restore movement options. He gives his favorite split squat variations, talks about hinge progressions for individual athletes and archetypes. This and much more on the show. It was awesome having Mike back on the podcast. Let's get to episode 463 with Mike Robertson. Mike, it has been a long time, and it's awesome to have you back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me, man. Super excited to catch up and talk shop a little bit.
Yeah, I know, I was looking back, I think it was episode 70. And it's funny to think, too, of how far both of our podcasts have been or come along since then. How many hundreds of episodes for both of us. So, yeah, I know we'll have a lot.
What are you on now? What number are you on?
462. Well, what about yourself?
Dude, we have to be close to the same. Yeah, I'd have to look. Maybe I'm like 480. So we'll both eclipse 500 this year, right?
Yeah.
Pretty exciting, or close to it.
Yeah, we will.
That's a long time to podcast, dude. That's a lot of podcasts.
It sneaks up on you. It almost becomes such a regular part of your life. Sometimes I wonder, I think, okay, if I wasn't doing this, would life feel really weird for like a few months?
Yes.
It would be a lot different. I know, back when I first started, it's funny because some people ask me, well, why did you start your show? And I didn't really have a good answer, but the only 2 podcasts that were like, it almost seemed like that was it. Like as if you'd been around forever, even though you hadn't. For some reason, it felt like it was your podcast and Jay DeMayo's, and it felt like you guys had been around forever. But then I look back and you guys only been around like 9 months or something before I started. So it's a weird perception of time anyways.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And I think about that all the time. Like if the Physical Prep Podcast just disappeared into the ether, would anybody notice? But I'd like to hope so. I would like to think somebody would miss it. So we'll see.
Yeah, certainly. It's always interesting. Yeah, someday, I'll have to take a little sabbatical just to, I don't know, just to check it out. But man, in that time though, I'm curious too. It is interesting, as we move through our 30s and into our 40s. I know you've written a ton of like powerlifting stuff from back in the day. And where have your own personal physical training, exploits gone to lately? Like, what do you focus on now compared to what you did like 10 years ago? If you walk in the gym, all right, I got an hour to train here.
Yeah, well, an hour would be nice. There's plenty of days it's like turn the clock on 45 minutes. When you sent me this question, I almost had to reflect back. Like, oh yeah, I powerlifted for like 11 or 12 years. Like that was the key component of my training sessions. And every workout, there was going to be a squat, a bench press, a deadlift, or a derivative of those. And now it's crazy because, it's almost the opposite. Like, hey, am I going to squat today? Is there going to be a deadlift in there? So I kind of joke around, but basically I train now to be able to demo exercises for clients and athletes. And so that's probably been one of the biggest shifts was, when you power lift long enough, and again, I wasn't like world class by any stretch, but respectably strong. And there are some negative consequences that come with that, right? You start to move like a power lifter, you lose some mobility. And so I kind of went through a couple years where it was just like unwinding my body, trying to maintain some force production in there, but really like, hey, if speed is an important trait of athletes, I should do some speed training. And so, whether it's you or Lee Taft or, these other great speed coaches, what are they doing? What are some things that I can incorporate into my workouts? Because also at this point in time, I'm building my athletic client base.
Mm.
So if I'm going to teach an NBA player how to do a hip turn, hopefully I can do it without looking like a power lifter that's squatting and deadlifting 500 pounds. So, so there's that element of it is just trying to stay healthy, age gracefully, if you want to think of it like that. But also, my kids keep getting older and more athletic. So I'm trying to keep up with them, right?
Oh yeah.
My daughter's
100%.
pretty fast, right? She's pretty fast. So, hey man, if she's got to go out and do conditioning in the summer, can I keep up with her? Can I kick a soccer ball with her without pulling my rec fem?
Yeah.
Last year, Cade's baseball team, not one of the other dads would coach or would pitch. So routinely I would go out and throw 200 pitches in batting practice. So like just being like all pro dad is kind of the training emphasis now too. It's like, hey, how can I maintain my athleticism? I still like to push weight and get after it in the gym, but it's definitely a more balanced and a little bit more nuanced approach than, hey, let's just get a full pot of coffee and rage Pantera and see how much weight we can move today.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Funny story. I just picked up one of those Ghost energy drinks at they were like half off, and I never it just brought me back to the day, in my 20s where you just slam caffeine. And I kind of stopped that somewhere in my early 30s, I think, just because I realized I was addicted to that before a workout. So I started to appreciate just training with a blank, caffeine slate. But I had a seminar with Austin Yoakum last summer, and we handed out Citrus Ghosts, and I saw it on for $1.50. I'm like, I'm going to have this before a workout sometime this week, It brought me back. I was going to say, it's so interesting how we were athletes playing when we were always athletes, right? But we were scholastic athletes at one point.
Yes.
And it's interesting to think of how the game changes. And in some ways, the game becomes, how can I mirror the needs of my current job through what I do?
Yes.
Like, how is this a game now? And I know it's like that for me when I train. Like, a lot of it's just creative, coming up with creative variations or feeling what a client might feel or coming up with a new sequence. So, I still love, the outputs. Absolutely. I hope to be in a master's track meet this summer or two.
Oh,
but
awesome.
there is there's massively that like note taking and then writing and like you said too, being able to mirror and replicate those things, because when a lot of strength and conditioning professionals start, I don't think they're considering that piece that you just mentioned. Usually it's more related around the big lifts and those.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it all comes down to how can I be the best coach, right? And I think the further you get away from whether it's athleticism or competitive sport. So here's a funny story. Like 2 years ago, I decided I'm going to go play some indoor soccer, right? My daughter's really getting interested. She's never really seen me play any sports. And so I, kind of embark on this journey of getting my body right, getting ready to strike a ball and the conditioning and all of that. And I'm not kidding you. The second I go in and I start warming up and I really start striking a ball hard, I can literally feel my rec fem tighten up, So, but it's like, hey, I went out, I played, and I played for a couple weeks after that, kind of nursed myself back to health. But it's like, you start to remember like, hey, this is what it's like to be an athlete.
Yeah.
Sometimes things you don't feel 100%. Sometimes you have to work around something. How do you change your game or stay on the field? Yes. How do you prepare yourself to play sport? How do you deal with fatigue? Like all these things that you kind of get insulated from when you're not in it anymore. And so I think that's something that's just helpful every now and then. Hey, go play a game of pickup basketball or soccer, or go, run in a master's track meet. It just kind of reminds you of, hey, this is what it's really like to go out and compete and what you have to do to prepare yourself to be successful.
Yeah. I just had a podcast with Matt Aldred where he was talking about that.
Oh, yeah.
The game is just so, we forget how stimulating, like transition, a dunk, a block, it's so stimulating. And funny story with the soccer. It was about a year and a half ago, I want to say. It might have been, I think I had just turned 40. And I mean, my neighbor invited me to hey, we need a sub for a pickup soccer, indoor soccer.
Yeah.
And I go to this thing and I was the oldest. I think there was one person older than me, but mostly guys in their early 30s, but crazy. Like within the first minute, someone tore their ACL.
Oh my gosh.
So that's not good. If I'm out there and I haven't played in a while, and someone, I'm like, but I mean, I'm in good shape from a strength perspective, from a linear acceleration and probably even deceleration and of course, jumping and all that stuff. but I got there right before it started, didn't warm up, didn't do any
Oh
kicks.
yeah. Wow.
And so I felt like physically, and also, so two things I forgot how intense soccer was one, just the straight up aerobic capacity.
Yes.
And even though I'll do
Massive.
tempo sprints, and you get all that time to walk back and recover, and then it's kind of intense, not even close to how intense aerobically that is. And then, so you mentioned your rec fem. We must be like, there must be some sort of link, man. So I had this, I mean, okay, I haven't kicked a soccer ball in like played in 20 years probably. Or maybe, I think I played at Cal with like the men's tennis team. We would warm up with soccer sometimes. I played a little bit with them. But so I had this like fadeaway side kick. Like I'm on the left side of the goal. I'm falling left. I see an opening. Like all my soccer instincts are coming back. I wasn't even that good. I only played up till about age 12 or 13. It was like my favorite sport though for a long time. Fadeaway sweep kick. Dude, I pulled something in that like rec fem just because like I never do that motion ever.
Absolutely.
And it was like this
with
low
speed.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was like this low grade. I couldn't finish. I kind of tried to play for like 5 minutes. I'm like, dude, I'm done. And it's so sad, but you forget that you go play that sport and it's so dynamic. And it's like, oh man. And so 100%. I think that maintaining that level of play is so essential because it's like it's a feel. You have to feel what this is like. It's more in some ways than just even seeing data and understanding that.
Well, you just remember what it's like, right? Because as we all get older and again, we get further away from it, it's like, man, you just forget what it's like to, hey man, like I'm really gassed or this guy he just keeps coming at me, It's like being in those environments, I think it just makes you more relatable as a coach.
Yeah, I agree. And even like, too, I think back to when I played, this was only with the men's tennis team and then the swim sprinters. Those are the two teams we would warm up with some sort of game before the lift, and like playing with the athletes, like that was always, they would love that, like it was just so good. So then that like level of relatability as well.
Absolutely.
So, with the time that you've spent, Mike, I mean, doing your own podcast, learning from great mentors, and just being through so much information, I think you may have mentioned this. I mean, I'm sure you mentioned it in many places, but it was, I believe it was a social media post you had, and it was talking about the lowest risk, highest reward approaches to mainline exercises, like the big lifts. And I don't think that's how we often think about things when we enter the field. It's more, well, what's the biggest output I can get from this exercise? How can I tag this with VBT and get a bigger, and that's great. I mean, I think that is awesome. 100%.
Sure.
I do that stuff, fairly regularly, but the older I've gotten, man, it's just like that low risk, high reward is just, it gets bigger and more important every year. So I'd love to hear about, well, what are some of the variations of those low, I keep feeling like I'm going to mix up the two, those low risk, high reward lifts and movements. What are some of your go-tos that you've really evolved towards in your time?
Yeah, man, this is such a great question. And so I'll give you a couple ideas because what's interesting about most of the guys and girls that I've worked with, most of them I've worked with their entire professional career, right? So we're talking 7, 8, maybe 9 years now that I've worked with some of them. And so your body changes a lot. 7, 8, 9 years, especially when you're playing professional basketball basically year round. So I'm absolutely in this. And so this is kind of like recalibrating or maybe shifting the goalposts a little bit. I've gone away from like really like chasing outputs or trying to push outputs up to, hey man, I just want to restore outputs, right? Like, can we just get you back somewhere near your top end in the off season? So we know you still got it, but we're just touching it, right? So I talk about touching intensity. And so some of my biggest go-tos, like I still love like anterior loaded squat variations. I mean, we're still, even with pros, we're going to start with a goblet squat or 2 kettlebell early in the off season because we're just trying to recapture motion, get them sitting down, shifting center of gravity back. But for me, like if I need an output at this point, I love a safety bar to a box. Obviously not crashing and, destroying your spine in the process, but, nice and controlled, exploding up. Just takes a lot of stress off the back. And just overall, generally my basketball players really like that. But one of the things that I've opted for as well is a lot more flywheel training with their squatting. I think it does a better job of mimicking the demands of the sport. When you're thinking about accelerations, decelerations, you kind of get the built-in accommodating resistance. But the nice thing about the flywheel is you're not tethered, right? And it was a hard lesson for me to learn because I used to listen to you talk about like elastic and bouncy. I'm like, what does that feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the opposite of my archetype, right? I'm more on the muscular side, probably your traditional wide muscular force dominant creature. And so, a barbell felt good to me for the most part, but I know a lot of my athletes don't. There's more of a rhythm, there's more elasticity. And so I find the flywheel for those guys and girls absolutely works wonders. And so I really like flywheel squatting variations as well as we kind of trend deeper in the off season and prepping them for preseason. So as far as a squat, I'd say anterior loaded flywheel. For benching variations, very little barbell stuff. And again, I'm talking more on like the aging athlete side. We'll talk more about developing athletes later. But I really love alternating work. I love floor pressing variations. Anything where we're, one is up, one is down, so we can maintain some motion through their thorax. And then as far as deadlifts go, if I'm going to deadlift somebody, I still really like a high handle trap bar deadlift, but I'll even put it up on blocks. So what it ends up looking like, because again, if you're thinking most basketball players trend towards the elastic, right, more upright postures. So I'll go high handle on blocks, and it'll almost look more like a reverse squat than it will a true hinge. So I find like those variations, and again, we're not pushing crazy outputs. I'm not trying to get them to a 9 or 10 out of 10, but hey, can I get you to an 8, 8.5 at some point in your off season? So we just kind of top off that like force production bucket and make sure it's still there. And then we can focus on other things.
Yeah. I had, just quick question. And because I might forget, I was just going to say with the bench press and the floor press, any reason like a floor press, I'm just curious, like how is there a range like, where you maybe lack internal rotation if you touch your chest, or is that
So that's part of it. Yeah. That's absolutely part of it. So if you look at a lot of these guys and girls, they're so like compressed on the top, right? So they don't have full range anyways. So I like the floor press for that variation. I like them to kind of reconnect with their feet, which is one of the benefits of doing like a floor press, right? You're just a little bit more supported versus, a lot of times if you're doing a bench press, unless you've got incredibly long legs, there's like an arch in your back and, you're just kind of in this position. So I really prefer like a floor press variation first because you can almost get a little bit of reach. You're still compressed on the backside, but you can still get that reach, a little bit shorter range of motion. So you're not getting as much compression up top. But let's be honest, Joel, like part of this is like throwing the dog a bone. Some of these guys and girls, they still want to like press. Yeah. Like a press is part of a good workout routine. So I can't just throw you just push-up variations.
Yeah.
So, hey, here's like how we can find a middle ground. Like it's not like a barbell bench press, which we know is really going to squish you and take away motion, but we can still get some of that feel of, hey, we're pressing and we're pushing some weight, but we're not taking away all that range of motion that in a lot of cases, we spent the last 4 to 6 weeks trying to get back.
Yeah, interesting. I think the thing that for some reason comes to my mind with floor press is I think about Joel Seedman and be like, validation,
yeah. Or you just think about like the old Louis Simmons videos, right? Where there's like 4 plates and they're using it to like work on the top end of their bench press.
Yeah.
Not really for that reason, but if we can just get people to consistently train and we give them some things that they're familiar with and that they enjoy, I feel like that just increases buy-in and makes them keep coming back.
Yeah, for sure. And even with like, it is interesting to think about. I don't look at it as like, oh, you should only train in the, and I'm sure you don't either. Like you should only train at this range, or it's more like, look, if you are going to go really heavy, maybe it's a little better to consider, not full ranges, just because a lot of people struggle with the internal rotation needed there. And if you're someone who's stiff as a board and you're constantly hammering yourself into that full range, then you probably do have a higher likelihood of something propping up. So it's just, but then, you go to that reciprocal work, you're getting your full range in something that the body has more options and movement options and things like that, or loaded stretching or whatever. Like it's just, there's always ways to get that done. It's just, maybe that's where it's just, I think everyone's argument, I just find it interesting to go into that 90-degree argument with that perspective in mind just a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you. I just think the longer I do this, like the less like hard and fast rules there are. Like everything is just context specific, right? Like what do I want to get out of this exercise? So if I want to get full range, hey man, I'll just use like a goblet squat or, I'll use this exercise that lends itself towards that. Or if I'm chasing an adaptation, well, I'm probably going to go through a shorter range of motion because, again, it's easier to overload in those positions. It's like so many of the arguments that, were in the space when we were coming up. It's like, okay, like depending on your situation, your environment, context, like you can make an argument for just about anything. Like, that's one of the things I used to always tell our interns was like, hey, look, like when they would do like their program defense, right? Like they'd have to write a program for a theoretical client, explain their rationale. And I always told them, it's like, look, the most important thing for me is that there's thought behind this, right? Like what's your rationale? Can you validate to some degree why you're choosing this exercise, set rep scheme, whatever? And if you can do that, then it's just an experiment. Run the experiment and see what kind of results you get.
Yeah. The sensationalism of dogmatic approaches will always attract viewers, like I'll only be on this part of your foot, only be to 90 degrees. But it's like the reality is, hey, there's different situations that demand different things. And it's like, to have that list, like you said, it's like, hey, if you want to go full range, here's some really great options that will give you a better full range experience. I just had Anthony Cockrell on talking about full range Zerchers with heel, on slant boards. Like, awesome. That's so cool. And I was just going, when I was my winters, I do rock climbing. It's kind of like I don't know, something else to do. But there's also a lot of gym options I don't normally get there. Which, funny enough, I don't have a squat rack at my house. I usually do sandbag squats front loaded at my house and slant boards and that type of thing. But I'll do some back squats full range in the winter just to like remind my body of what that stimulus is like, lest I get too almost like like you have all the other variations. But it's just interesting because I'll do the deep back squats and I'll think to myself, okay, this was really important for me in my 20s early on in track and field. But then, so it's like I feel the tension in the quads and knee extensors especially, and just the global stimulation of the movement. But then at the same time, I also feel my body compressing in some little not so great ways at the bottom that, I could get away with that and I needed that. But if I kept doing that over and over again for decades, I feel how that's going to catch up with me. And so, there's certainly no one answer to everything, but to explore everything with some of those things in mind, I think can help all of us.
Yeah. And I just think, especially as we age, it's more and more important to I just think of 3 buckets, right? Like there's the mobility and movement quality bucket. There's the neurological outputs bucket. So you can speed, power, strength. And then there's like the metabolic capacity buckets, right? And so you got to kind of dabble in all 3 of those, at least over the course of a training year, right? Because the last thing you want is one of those things to rapidly deteriorate. I think that's when things really go awry. And so, I think of things in very much the same way. It's like, you got to top those buckets off. And, sometimes it's like, hey, you get to a certain point. It's like, hey, I've gotten enough out of this, right? So with your back squats, like, hey, I got enough out of this. Now I'm going to go move on to something else. And maybe it's changing an exercise or a different focus of your training. But you just don't have to beat that same drum year round anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing. And with the flywheel, you mentioned it. I think that's interesting. I've been thinking about with the rhythm, especially like my buddy Paul Cater loves like K-box flywheels or whatever variations they're out there. And then the Versa pulley, because inherent in all of them, there's always a rhythm that exists with that where it might not in a tradition. I mean, I guess it does if it's like 4-0-2-1, that you have.
But it's not the same, right?
Yeah, no.
Like, I just feel like with a flywheel, it's very organic. It's very rhythmic. And I know you've talked about this. Like, this is something I think about more and more. Like, most of the best great athletes, especially like skilled athletes, have great rhythm, right? That's not something I was genetically blessed with, but then I watch a lot of, my higher end guys and I'm like, wow, just their rhythm and the pace and the athleticism that they can do these things with. I think it lends themselves better to some of those types of resistance versus just a standard barbell.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah. The more high level athletes, and I have this question for you with like working with kids and pros, and then everyone in between, but like, you notice that so many of them, especially basketball too, because it's just, the ball, I think I took that for granted growing up. Like the ball is the rhythm. And even I think about my days just in like the summers, and there wasn't a whole lot of basketball. I just go shoot around for like hours. And then to have like really intensive workouts, but then just shooting around for hours, just dribbling and like the rhythm of that, I feel like was such good recovery too. And I just took that for granted. That piece. It'd be interesting to have like almost like some sort of rhythm test for different sports. I feel like basketball would have to be one of the absolute highest for sure.
It's got to be, especially if you watch like the best shooting guards or point guards. their rhythm and athleticism is just off the charts.
Yeah, with so bench press, do you do like if you bench press now these days, do you do barbell or do you do different variations or mostly push-ups up? I'm just asking because I have my own journey of that too.
Yeah, there are times I've got like a little basement gym that I'll go in and just bang weights in. Generally, because of the way I'm built, again, I'm built to just go kind of straight downhill. So I try not to do a ton of that. For whatever reason, I was a horrible bench presser too. Like anything lower dominant squats, deadlifts, I could kind of sort out. I was never a great bench presser, so I never felt like super enamored with it. But again, just trying to maintain shoulder range of motion, keeping that, ability for my thorax to rotate. A lot of times I'll just go alternating stuff.
Yeah.
So floor press, glute bridge, floor press, an alternating dumbbell bench. Those are kind of more of my wheelhouse now versus a traditional barbell. I do like the old school, just close grip every now and then, though, especially in the summer, build the tries a little bit.
Oh yeah.
There's still a little bit of bro in me. I'm 46 years old. There's still a little bro in there for sure.
Do you feel like that close grip, like the internal rotation piece, right? Like that definitely is going to force that a little bit more. I suppose you probably think about all these things differently than you would have when you were 20. Like 20 close grip bench, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's good to just think about it from just working the tries. I don't know, sometimes if you bring too many shades in.
This is the thing that I always come back to, right? Like Bill and I have had this discussion so many times, like in passing in the gym. It's like, oh my gosh, like just how easy was it to train in your 20s?
Yeah.
Right? Like your options are so low. Your focus is so high. Like, hey, I just want to get big, or I want to get jacked. I want to get strong. Like, so what exercises help me do that? Okay, these 10, great. I'm going to do those like all the time. Versus now it's like you're almost overwhelmed with information and thoughts and like, oh, what am I trying to do today? And, there's so many exercise variations. It's like you can bury yourself in complexity if you don't watch yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have to find those movements that you can train like dumb, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
For me, it's sandbag carries up and down the hill. Like that's like the dumbest thing I can do.
Yeah, but again, it's like you called them safe to fail exercises, and that's what I think about it. Like low risk, high reward. What can I do? Another litmus test for me is, what exercises can I go in, and it doesn't take me like 20 minutes to warm up to do them effectively. Like if I were to go in and back squat, it's going to probably take 20 minutes by, ankles, knees, hips, lower back, shoulders, like all the things you have to prep to get ready versus, hey, if I want to go in and do like a decent goblet squat, I could do that in 3 to 5 minutes if I really had to. So,
yeah, I feel like the same way with, the like just sleds or reverse sleds, especially. There was the other day where my, I had to watch the baby. This was a spectacle if anyone saw it, but like I have one of those Spud, it's like a Spud magic carpet is what it's called. It's like a
no, we had one.
Oh heck yeah. You put like plates. Awesome. Yeah, you could put like plates on it, and then I put a TRX in it, and then you got your backwards pull or forwards or whatever. And I had to watch the baby, and I like, I'm like, all right, what am I gonna do? And then I'm like, so I put the baby. She's like 16 months, so she can sit on it. I put her on the plates. And I'm just dragging her backwards in the front yard. But I mean, she's fine. She's not going to fall. And she loves it. She thinks it's great. And you don't have to warm up for that at all. You literally just jump in and just go for it. And there's something that is really special about that. Yeah, it's almost, there needs to be a list of like no warm-up activities. The best no warm-up activities.
These are literally things that I think about, right? Because they're not only are they safe to fail, but they like naturally just put your body in the right position. So to second that, my kids used to love, whether it was the Prowler, the sled, they would love riding on it. And it's like Milo, right? Carrying the bull.
Oh, yeah.
Except your kids just keep getting bigger. Yeah. But no, like reverse sleds are one of those exercises where a lot of times early off season, where people are stiff, they're restricted, center of gravity is pushed really far forward. Hey, let's just do some reverse sleds kind of as an intermediary between kind of your warm up and your actual workout. Gets them to shift back a little bit better. Everything feels better. And then we're kind of off to the races. So yeah, I love reverse sled. It's arguably one of my favorite exercises.
Yeah, it's definitely become more mine too. I remember when I was first at Cal, this was 2012. There was like, I remember Scott Thom, who's been on this show, he used reverse sleds for the basketball a lot. And I was like, lower quads, this is great. And I did like it, but I think it was, Bill, one of the Bill and Chris podcasts talking about, I think maybe it was like Bill's sled. He did like a sled, like masterclass type thing. And You
Oh
know,
yeah.
the backwards and like pulling your center of mass backwards. And I was like, oh, that
Yes.
makes sense. I also would think about like when I played basketball, you're doing all directions. And if you don't have that, I don't know, it's just like a rhythmic, easy stimulus to kind of do that too. And yeah, it's
Yes.
something that I haven't done it yet, but even like almost supersetting it with main lifts is like a little washout, you know, or like
Yeah.
it's a cool movement.
Yeah.
It's definitely grown to one of my favorites.
Uh, I think I did a video somewhere about this, but like ways to prep for a squat workout.
Mm,
And so that's actually one of the things that I include in there because again, depending on what variation you use, especially if, my thorax just gets pushed so far forward,
mm,
right? So if I do like a Zerker or like a TRX, kind of allow that space to open up and then I go and superset that with like a goblet squat or something like that where again I can keep that
mm.
backside open. It just allows me to sit down in that squat a lot more effortlessly.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about that as like a Zercher, a superset of a reverse sled and a Zercher because
Yeah.
they're both pulling your arms forward and opening up space in the shoulder blades. So it's kind of getting
Yeah.
that thing that you're, especially the athletes too, who like everything has been taught to be pinned together behind them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah, literally they're just like walking around with
yeah,
shoulder blades pinned back and their chest is super far forward. Yeah. Yeah, those are fun to unwind.
yeah. No, that's a good one. I would love, if you don't have one existing, I would love to see like a list, if you do a post or a podcast someday on those, like your top, like just jump in and do it exercises
Yeah,
with no warm up.
I need to do that. That's a great idea. I will do that. I
Yeah.
will do that.
Because I think about it too, like, yeah, like when we're 20, right? Like I remember when I was 17, just warming up for basketball and I would just go jumping off one leg dunk easy with like minimal warm
Love.
up. And I was like, man, what I wouldn't give to have that but it changes, because you still learn to love those things that you can do and are meant to do with the minimal amount and just go for it. So,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
all right. So, you alluded to this already in your answers, but it was with the reverse sled drag or helping push the center of mass back, or I think people would call it like you're restoring early stance,
Sure.
basically unwinding or restoring all the explosive propulsion an athlete did. And I think it goes back to the idea of, okay, like when people get into sports performance, and again, like the track coach in me, I mean, I love speed and power and all those things, but the longer I've done this, the more I prioritize. And even if you are track and speed and power, the other days need to be restorative. And well,
Yes.
how do you do that better? And it was a conversation with Ty Terrell, who I know is in, that tree in your neck of the woods. And him and I were talking, and it's like, in some ways, you're almost you have the hat of being an early stance coach. Because
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
yeah, because like, I mean, if you just keep taking already explosive athletes who are already filling that bucket and it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do more stuff that pushes you forward. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah, no, I
go-tos
know exactly what you mean.
for what
Yeah.
are some of the ways you love to help restore those movement options in athletes who are already filling that explosive bucket? Or if it's just a recovery day, what's some of your favorite ways to restore options to push the center of mass back so that they can be better for the explosive work on the other days?
Yeah. Yeah. The way I think about it, and I don't mind the term early stance, and I know that's Bill's like preferred term, but I think what resonates more with athletes now is I talk about balancing propulsion and braking,
Hmm.
right? Which are, kind of like scientifically appreciated terms. There you see people talking about braking versus propulsion. But yes, I think of it a lot like, hey, you're already great at propulsing, right? And I just think of it as a bell curve, right? Hey, at a certain point, we've maxed the benefits out. Now we're going too far in that direction. And so now we're pushing you so far forward, you're losing mobility, you're losing movement options. So I always talk about this balance between braking and propulsion. And so I just kind of think back to, okay, well, what do the bulk of my first programs look like? Especially when somebody comes back and they've just played, say, pro basketball or pro soccer for 8, 9, 10 months. Reverse sled drags. We just
Mhm.
talked about that, right? And I got 5 or 6 different variations depending on what that person needs, but a lot of sessions we're going to start with that. Actually, even before that, something I'll send a lot of my athletes, but I call it my ground prep series. But it's this like little sequence that I have athletes do like in between. They've just done some resets before they do their full like dynamic warm up where they're up and moving around this ground prep series where it's like cat camels, rock and rolls, armbar series, that sort of thing. All of those things that kind of get them to create space on the backside, shift their center of gravity back, kind of bridges the gap. So I really like that early in an off season. Sled drags. I love anterior loaded squat variations. We've talked about that. And then it just comes back to like, how bad is their squat? And I'm not even joking, right? Because like some guys come back, you know what I mean? It's like there's some guys where I've coached them so long. I had this guy this last year, Ed, and man, I've coached Ed 7 or 8 years now. He played in the CBA this year, the Chinese Basketball Association, and man, he got a lot of minutes. Like this guy was playing 38, 40 minutes every night. And it's weird because he has this gap in his season where for 2 months, it's every other night. Like he played like 30 games in like 60 days. And I mean, high usage, then he gets like a month off because it's the Chinese New Year. So he comes back and I'm like, dude, he looks like an accordion, like he's so bent over. So like literally we're starting with, a plate reaching squat or, like a low cable squat variation on slant boards to where we can shift him back as much as possible and just try and unlock his body and, recapture those level changes. So, anterior loaded squat variations based on where they're at and how they're moving are a big one. Either front foot elevated or front heel elevated split squat variations. I love all of those. Another one that I've kind of added more into the list here lately are like wall supported hack squats, with like a foam roller. We've been doing a lot more of that because if you think about it, breaking is really either the arms and or the legs being in front of the body, right? And so there you've got, and I used to do this when I was training in-home clients back in like 2005. I would do these with people because they didn't have a squat rack. Oh, yeah. Now I'm like, oh wait, this is like a really valid option because now these people can find their heels, right? They can stay back. They can keep the backside of their body open. We can train legs a little bit without some of the spinal compression. So, all of those things work well. And then when I'm thinking like upper body, I'm thinking push-up variations, obviously because you can get that reach and open up the backside. I love exercises where we're getting rotation through the thorax. So a lot of times that ends up being cable variations, cable rows, cable pull downs, anything where we can get that thorax to start moving again. I'm just thinking first block is recapture, braking, shift center of gravity back, however you want to think about it. Because if you shift center of gravity back, you give them back those movement options, you recapture rotation, and immediately they're going to feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny with the hack squat. I want to go do that now, but I was just thinking the other day about, like the reverse sled drag or like back in the day when you do close grip bench or reverse sled, you're just thinking of the muscle. And the wall, I like wall sits so much more now these days because it's like, it's just pushing you back. Like it's the easiest way to find your heels. I love them on like restoration days too. Just like 3 sets of 40 seconds or something. It's just like the easiest thing, but you always feel better after. So,
well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I just keep coming back to like, I used to always joke around with athletes and I was kind of right, but I used to always say like weightlifting and like strength training is the only sport where it benefits being on your heels, right? But the weight room is a great place to help athletes recapture their heels. And Lee Taft and I have talked about this numerous times now, but hey man, you got to find your heel at some point, especially if you're trying to slow yourself down. When you're always like midfoot or toes, I feel like over time, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And not just that too, but like and it took me a long time to figure this out, but like the recovery aspect, even if you have your track and field hat on and it's only about the outputs.
Yeah.
I find I just did a podcast with Bob Thurnhofer, who's a jumps coach down in Louisville.
Yes.
And I was looking at some of his, he posts a ton of his workouts and his general strength, and he will do one of his series. It's like you do your sprint and jump work, and then to finish that, you do like backwards hops, backwards skips, backwards run. It's like just like what you're saying. You did a bunch of propulsion, so let's do some of the braking. And it's like if you think of track, why do I need to do braking? It's like, well, it just helps you recover, it rounds you out. It gives your body more permission to do that. And I just did a workout the other day, which was largely inspired by reading those workouts of Bob's and then throwing a few other things in there. But I usually go once a week, I try to do a run, like a long, slower run, and it's about 1 kilometer to this 80-meter hill. So I jog this hill, run up and down the hill, and then I'll jog like a quarter mile or 300 yards, then come back, and I'll do that cycle. So it's like 4 80-meter hills, jog, 4 80-meter hills, jog, 4 80-meter hills, and jog. It's a lot of propulsion. Yeah,
That sounds hard.
it's not easy. Sometimes I entertain myself by throwing a tennis ball and chasing it on the way up the hill. It's a
Oh yeah, there you go.
relatively low traffic area, so I always fear
Yeah.
that I'm going to be chasing it and some car's going to come and like, what is this guy doing? And then like have to swerve and miss me.
Right.
So you keep it interesting. But the way
Yeah.
back, the kilometer back, I treat it as literally like backwards hop, backwards skip, backwards run. I felt so good the next day. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like, it was very noticeable. There's like this springiness in my legs that was hard to define. And then
Yes.
even I've done a lot of splits recently where it used to be, and this is a great split, you do sprints and like heavy squats in the same day. But that's like
Yep.
all propulsion. And I've actually
Yeah.
do a lot more splits now where I do all my sprinting in one day and jumping or whatever, explosive stuff. And the next day I'll lift, but it's way more early stance. It's like you said, front
Yeah.
foot elevated split squats has been one I'm really digging. And I find I can go heavy in that, but still feel good the next day because it's the opposite, and it's like,
Absolutely.
it's so cool to explore that dichotomy where there's more than you just thought,
Yeah.
how you could do it.
It reminds me, I don't know, it's probably had to be 8 to 10 years ago now, but we had Boo Schexnayder come in and talk for like a full day at one of our physical prep summits. And I remember him talking about, hey, do squats one day and the next day do like a split squat. All of these like great coaches, they're so far ahead of their time. And, maybe they have a different way of describing it or thinking about it, but it's like, hey, when you look at what they did and what works, like start to pull things out of that. Like, okay, well, why did that work? And I think that's just such a great way to look at things.
Yeah, especially all those old general strength circuits too, like Boo
Yes.
and Dan Path, and just looking through some of that, and even just going back, like almost having like an old, like a manual of old books, and seeing the things they did
Yes.
for not only training but restoration. A lot of it was really good.
Yes. 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 I love it.
Yeah. So, so along with that, so I have, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you're teaching you already mentioned the squat. So with the front loading,
Yep.
but maybe let's get into the hinge a little bit. I think squatting is pretty straightforward. I think there can be different pieces with the hinge that can make it a little interesting. I mean, everyone says, all right, let's teach athletes to squat and teach them to hinge. What's your approach to teaching the hinge for athletes, and how far do you take that? Like you mentioned deadlifts, like you mentioned we do a squat when I asked you, and bench pressing, and deadlift is the trap. But just curious where you've gone with hinging and hinging patterns.
Dude, this is a great question. It's funny because I've recently started taking on like younger basketball players. Like for a while, I had to kind of condense my schedule around my availability, right? Like, hey, I want to coach and I want to have my podcast and do all these things, but after about 4:00, I want to be a dad. I want to be able to coach my kids in sports. Well, that really took me out of the high school strength and conditioning game. And so now as my kids are getting older, I can get back into that. So I've gotten the chance to eval some high school kids lately. And I'm immediately reminded, hey man, this is a lot different than training a 25-year-old professional athlete.
Yes.
When you got a 15-year-old kid and as soon as you ask them to hinge and they just turtle up, you're like, okay, we got some work to do here. And so there's a couple things that I really like to do, and I've used these for years, but they just continue to work. So I love just like a wall hinging pattern where you stand a couple inches away from a wall. You have somebody start with soft knees, put your hands on your thighs, and literally just try and push your hips straight back, right? And people used to laugh at me, but I'd put the PVC pipe on their back, because I'm old school like that. I'm sorry, that works.
It does.
Like that
100%.
kinesthetic cue works. The second they start to, hey, do you feel you only have one spot of your spine on that now? They're like, oh, okay. So little stuff like that still works, and trying to help them understand, hey, here is what it feels like to load your glutes and your hamstrings versus when you just round your back out. So I love to start with stuff like that. If they're still not getting it, something that I'll do in a lot of cases is almost more of like a cable hip hinge. So imagine you've got a rope in the front, right? So the rope helps you press down and kind of engage your core, right? Bill would hate that term. Engage your anterior core. Well, let's use both words. But just creating some stiffness on the front side, right?
Yeah.
And then pushing the hips back. Things like that tend to work really well. But I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the years is that, like, you just can't put anybody in a box, right? Like, you could give me all of the external pieces possible, and my squat's not going to look like a great squatter, right? You could give me heel elevation, anterior loading, like based on my body shape, it's going to look a little bit hingy all the time. And then there's the other end of that spectrum too that I've really started to respect. Like some of these super elastic, if you want to call them narrow ISAs, these squatting archetypes, you can do whatever you want. You can pull all the bells and whistles out. Their hinge is never going to look like mine. And so I think that's where it's like, hey, do I want you to still hinge? And do I want to expose you to some of these ranges of motion and try and teach you to load your hips and your hamstrings? Absolutely. But I also recognize the fact like your deadlift is never going to look what I would describe as perfect. And that's okay. So does that answer the question, sort of?
Yeah, for sure. And I will say I've learned that as well, is that the wide ISAs, some of them can make that deadlift be so powerful and recruit so much hamstrings. That's the thing I would do RDLs as a real narrow and be like, yeah, I feel the stretch load in my hamstrings, but I mean, I can't tell you how many Olympic pulls and hang cleans and just didn't recruit those muscles all that well, with that pattern. I'm glad you mentioned the wall hinge and the stick. I will say it's funny. I remember this. So this is one of those athletes you just remember. This was back in like 2011. I had recruited this a pretty good sprinter for Division III to the college I was working at, and this guy was the narrowest narrow, like straight up. I guess is it the piston, like just super narrow, super like counter nutated hips, or really like. I mean, we were doing RDLs or something, and I just remember, I didn't know anything about this stuff back in the day. This guy looked so bad. I mean, like you said, he goes to lean forward, and it's just like all rolled up. And but I just gave him the stick, and I put him next to the wall, and I said, keep this on your back while you scoot your butt back. And he got better. And for the sake of what we were doing, mostly just Olympic lifts, he actually became pretty serviceable. And I wonder, looking back in time, now I probably wouldn't have had him do as many deadlift variations as I did back then, for sure, based on his body type. Probably like a lot more like the cleans from high boxes and stuff with a little more vertical torso. But he, I wonder if I knew what I knew now, I think I might have over intellectualized the whole thing to him back then, instead of just saying, hey, just put a stick on your back and stick your butt. Because you have to open your hips somewhat to do that. Like you can't just do that without getting an opening space back there.
No, this is what I always come back to, right? And I think sometimes people hear these things and, they'll hear, oh, well, this person has like an elastic or an upright squatting archetype, so never hinge them. And I think that's actually a mistake. Like the more I think about this, like if I train a Gen Pop client, right, that their only goal is to maybe hit some body comp goals in the gym and walk with their partner at night. Okay, that's cool. Because it doesn't matter what exercise you do, right? But if I'm taking an athlete, like sports are inherently chaotic, right? Basketball, soccer, football, you're going to get put into different positions, right? So my thought process is, hey, yes, that again, if we're taking like a narrow squatting archetype, hey, that's great. We're going to use those as our main lifts because that's where you probably are most comfortable. But I also want to expose you to some form of probably bilateral hinge, which we modify, a staggered stance, a single leg RDL of some variation. And I know it's not going to look exactly perfect, but I'd rather expose you to some of those postures and positions in a controlled environment versus having you now run into those with external forces, right? Speed, intent, potentially somebody running into you in a chaotic environment. And so I think that's one thing that I've thought a lot about here lately, and I think can make a huge impact when we're talking about trying to keep our athletes healthy.
Yeah, without question. That's one of those things too, where like in track or combine training, to come out of a 2-point start in a staggered stance, your torso's bent forward, and you kind of fall forward and roll into a start. Like there's a lot of hinge in that. And like you said, those athletes who try to hinge or deadlift or RDL and they just roll up, they usually look kind of like that when they're in that staggered stance trying to do that. And so at the least, to teach them to create that space, you don't have to put hundreds of pounds on it necessarily, but they should at least own that space to some degree. Maybe they're not going to get everything to open all the way, but to open enough that you can at least hold some of those longer levers, I think is really valuable. And that's something like you said, I've been thinking about that a lot the last few years. And thinking about that and trying to reconcile that with what I see. And then it's just, well, how much do you load it? What, I wanted to ask you about like Camperini deadlifts, like a staggered hinge, right? Like, tell me a little bit about like staggered hinges or some of the non-traditional hinges that you're using with athletes.
Yeah. So I really like Campo deadlifts. Shout out to Mike Campo. I don't know how he got that named after him. You need to ask Bill that sometime when he's on.
For sure.
Bill somehow named Campo. I mean, you got a deadlift, I think he got some sort of angle named after him. I'm like, dude, this guy's like 20, 30 years old. How is he getting all these exercises? I want an exercise.
Yeah.
But here's what I like about them, right? Like if you think about different postures and positions, like each one affords pros and cons. And I've had an article I've been working on for like 3 weeks. I need to finish it up. But when you think about like a symmetrical, like bilateral symmetrical stance, ideal for force production, right? Like that's why we squat and deadlift in those postures or those positions. Also, not great if you want to recapture rotation in most cases. So I think that's the real benefit when we go from like a bilateral symmetrical stance to a bilateral but like offset stance, right? So whether it's a campo deadlift, some form of split squat variation, now we've got both feet in contact with the ground, but we maintain that ability to turn and rotate, right? Versus then when you would go to like a true single leg, now you're kind of like, even though one leg is in contact with the ground and you get that benefit of, hey, I'm training each leg individually, the body tends to still work as like a collective whole, right? Like your pelvis kind of does one thing, your thorax kind of does one thing, versus in a split squat or a campo deadlift, now you can kind of like get these turns and these rotations. And so I think that's the real benefit there. And so, like you were alluding to, if somebody's really rotated to one side, right? You need to get them back on their left side. Like a campo deadlift is a great activity where, hey, now we can kind of bias you with your left leg back. Hey, let's try and create that turn or that rotation. So we start to even things out side to side, right? Because maybe they have space on the back of the right hip, but they don't have it on the back of the left.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense too, because I think, and that's one of the things that always sticks with me with Bill's teachings is looking at things as a series of rotations, even straight ahead running being a series of subtle rotations. And then if you watch someone accelerate from a rear view, you really see those subtle, not they aren't as subtle, they're bigger turns side to side, and it becomes more subtle as you come upright into sprinting. But so the campo, just maybe if you can describe the exact setup with that, because I'll put it in the show notes too, but I think if people and honestly, even going through all the variations, I get confused. It's like, okay, if it's in this hand, wait, what's turning again? I see right. I can feel and see why it's happening, but I get a little bit of lost if it's like, okay, this leg's forward or it's this hand. So, and maybe just the basics of like what foot's forward, what leg's straight, which way are we turning? I would love to get your perspective.
I would say the variation you're probably going to coach the most is with the right foot in front of the left, right? So the natural internal bias, and I mean, depending on what school of thought you're from, everybody's kind of agrees, hey, we get turned from left to right, right? So if that's the case, we want to turn ourselves back right to left. So one of the easiest ways to do that is right foot in front of left. Again, there's up for debate which hand you hold the kettlebell in. That's fine. Let's just say for now, we've got the weight in the right hand, left foot is slightly behind the right. And then when I'm coaching this, what I'll generally do is I'll tell the athlete, I need your knees soft, right? Because a lot of times people will hyperextend. So I want the knees soft and I want you to feel your arches. Because if you've got arches, you can push straight down into the ground, right? So from there, the leg or the arm is long. I'm going to push straight back into the left hip without letting the knee push back. And that's a key distinction there. So, again, a lot of times you start to hinge and people are just extending that knee. And so they're kind of moving around the back of that left hip. So if you keep the knee soft and you push the hip straight back, you're going to feel that literally in the left back pocket. And so that's where you're kind of getting the right things. So when I'm looking at them from the side, kind of, the knee is over like the heel or over the midfoot just a little bit. And then another thing that I found is really helpful if you walk around to the front, because not a lot of people look at things from the front. But a lot of times what people will do is they will actually start to turn their knee out. So we've talked probably in the past about foot, knee, hip. So they're turning that left knee out again because they're trying to move around that. So if you keep foot, knee, hip in line while pushing the hip straight back, it's like all left back pocket.
Cool.
And so now you're getting that real internal rotation. And I mean, going back to like the Shirley Sarman stuff, right? Like ball in socket, if you internally rotate, you need that posterior glide. So that's where you kind of create that space on the back side of the hip to move into.
Yeah. And I would think that if you never program anything like that's a staggered stance that really brings out the turn, you also aren't going to see athletes when they're trying to cheat around it. It's going to give you another lens to observe, do they have true internal rotation here or true rotation? or do they have
Yes.
no options? And to think like,
Yes.
if you go through your sport and you don't have at least a little more options in that turn, it's probably not going to be, a great thing
Yeah.
over time. Maybe you can figure it out, but it would certainly be better to have more options, at least a little
Yes.
bit.
Absolutely. And I think, again, this is what I keep coming back to early off season with soccer, basketball, football. It doesn't matter who I'm working with. Like, generally, the first month is cleaning things up, restoring
Mm.
tendon health, you know, developing connective tissues. But for me, it's, hey, just unwinding them, getting those movement options back so that ultimately then we can start to build them up from there.
Yeah. And I go back to, I made a note of it with the, I was just thinking about things like to superset the reverse sled into and restoring. You mentioned like the ground base, like things on the ground rolling. And then like you got the sled, like that's so like, even just to keep things as simple as they humanly could be, that's such a good piece there as well. And so I made a little bit of note of that. I wrote something below that I can't decipher. that's okay. So I alluded to this question earlier in the show, and Michael Zwiefel, who's been on this show several times, had talked about and you especially get this within the private sector, but the ability or opportunity to work with both youth sports, so one end of the spectrum, and then pros on the other side, and you see where you start and where you end up, and. So I know you've coached youth sports. Obviously, you work with pro basketball players. Having worked with both populations, is there any insights or general takeaways that have influenced your viewpoints over time with maybe just even training someone in the middle, but really anything? I'll leave the question pretty open-ended there.
Yeah. And I think this is a great question. And again, I've got even more perspective now because I had trended for a long time where it was very, it's either Division I players or professional players. And now getting back more into, hey, I've got like some freshmen, some sophomore. So some of these young kids. And so the way I've always kind of described it, and it's just reinforced now, is when I've got a pro, I'm really like managing their intensity and managing their outputs. Like my goal at the end of every year, restore movement options, top off like their neurological outputs, and just make sure they feel great going into camp. Right? They've already proven like they have the physiological outputs to play their sport at the highest level. So, hey, if I can top them off and I make sure they feel good, then, hey, man, like they're in a great spot to go and have a good year, get another contract, make more money. Now, on the other end, you've got these young kids and they don't have the neurological outputs to play at these levels. So here's a great case in point. About 3 weeks ago, I eval this kid and, we do the vertec and, he does his like vertical and it's like, okay, whatever. And I set it at 11.6 at the top, right? I'm like, no way, this kid. Dude, he touched 11.7
Wow.
as a sophomore. I'm like, dude, this is like the fourth highest. Like, I'm not a track guy, but like that's like the fourth highest jump I've ever seen in my gym. And he's a sophomore in high school.
That's amazing.
But then I take him over and I put him on force plates, right? And I've got, the normative data and all that stuff to look at. And I compare him against other Division I players. And it's literally his jump is like off the charts, but then all of his force production is like one first percentile, right? Like he's a baby. He's 6'4", 145, like he's never worked out before. And so the fun part there is like, yeah, he can jump out of the gym, but so like this guy just needs to train. He needs to become more physical, more confident. And so I think that's one of the things that, I love my pros. Like they're the best, not just best, amazing basketball players, they're amazing humans. But a lot of it now for them, it's just management. And it's kind of like Groundhog Day. All right, hey, you've lost all this range of motion. Let's recapture that. It's like the same kind of 3 training blocks every year. I tweak it and refine it. I think I get better every year. But now I actually get to train somebody for like 2 or 3 years and I get to develop those physiological outputs to just make them an absolute monster and hopefully turn them into a Division I player or hopefully a professional basketball player someday. So I think that's what's fun, right? Like I get to go back and actually just train again. And I'll give you one other story. This kid I eval yesterday. I'm used to first conversation with a pro, like just bring me your medical records, right? Like just give me all the injuries and like, it's like this entire page long of just injuries. And I'm talking to this kid yesterday. Second question I always ask is, do you have any aches, pains, or boo-boos? And he's just like, no. So what do you mean no? He's like, no, like literally. I said ankles, no, knees, hips, back. Like he has no injuries. So we actually just get to go in the gym and start training. versus in a lot of cases with a pro, it's like, hey, I've had all these injuries. This particular joint was bothering me last year. So again, you're spending so much time unwinding them and putting them back together. And, it's like duct tape, get them feeling good, throw them back out there versus, these younger kids, we actually get to just train, we get to develop them and hopefully, again, make them into the kind of player where they can play at a collegiate or professional level.
Yeah, it's interesting that wave of like needs intensity, needs strength too, needs to be put back together, needs restoration.
Yes, that's literally what it is,
Yeah. Do you
literally what it is.
With some of those younger, like let's say a high school player who needs outputs, I mean, we talk squatting variations and those kind of things. Are you more likely to have them do like, I mean, a back squat, or is it more like a Hatfield and maybe it's just, heavier, or I don't know. Is there any like thought process on how some of those things might change between the two?
So like there's a kid that's in right now, like he's already committed to a Division I school. And if you look at his force plate metrics and I compare him against Division I players, like his breaking's off the charts, right? He's like 97th, 98th percentile. I'm like, all right, we don't need more breaking, but he needs propulsion. So, hey, we're going to get after the weight room a little bit, right? So, we're going to do like yesterday we did a heavy safety bar squat to a box, right? He's going to do a heavier trap bar deadlift. Like he needs a little bit of weight in his hands because I always think of it like this, right? And I love how you think about this because I feel like we're opposite ends of the spectrum as far as our body shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've learned a lot from you just hearing you talk about elasticity and that sort of thing. But there is a point where like, hey, you need some strength training, right? You need to like top off that bucket. Now, if you go too far, you don't feel good and you rob yourself of your natural elasticity. But like, that's this kid. He's naturally elastic, but he just needs some of that like kind of under the hood force production. And I think that's going to raise his boat. And then it just comes down to, okay, but how much?
Yeah.
Right. Because I think the natural inclination is more is better when it comes to the weight room. And, like with an elastic archetype, like there's definitely a point where it's like, okay, now we're taking things away that make you great.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just the trick to see how far to go with that kind of thing before you start to see things not give you the results you want. Yeah, deteriorate.
Yeah.
I do want to bring this up too with the sport, even not moving back further, time machine. Like I know you've coached your kids like youth sport teams. Do you have any real memorable teams or experiences from that that stand out to you?
I'll give you two. So I have this video of Cade, and he's like 4 years old. I think he's either 4 or 5. And I don't know how, because he's hated soccer ever since, but my dude literally went for a hat trick in a game. When they're like really little and there's like one kid that like stands out, like, oh my gosh, this kid actually isn't waving at his mom. He's not crying. Like they're just going and banging goals. That was Cade. So I remember that at 4 years old. Now he hates soccer now, which is kind of funny. I don't know why. We like show him this video. I'm like, dude, you loved it. He's so excited. But I still remember that. And then I actually coached this one team with Kendall, and I say this, but it's like that was one of my most memorable sports experiences, period. And I've done this for I've coached for 25 years. I played sports, and my entire life. But we had a team that was just all the cast-offs, right? Because she was it was 5th, 6th grade, and all these other teams had been together for years. And so I'm like, well, we're in 5th, 6th grade now. I'll coach. And so I get all the cast-offs, and all the other coaches are like, oh, that girl sucks, or she's mean. Get all the cast-offs. And we figured it out. Like the start of the year, we were not very good. I remember we went to one team and they're physical and beat the crap out of us like 5-1, and half our girls are crying. At the end, we go against the same team, grind it out, and we win 1-0, and we won like our little championship.
Yeah. Wow.
Like won the tournament. I was like, dude, like I still get like almost like a little bit of chills thinking about that because it was such a great team. And so many of those girls still see me and they're like, oh, coach, how are you? That was like 3-4 years ago now. So like stuff like that is really memorable. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm just built to coach.
Yeah.
Like it's just in my DNA, like whether it's in the weight room, on a field, like I just love coaching and trying to make a positive impact on people. But yeah, those are two memories that really stick out.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I do think that whole like born to coach thing, it does like, because I think youth sports is the epitome of so much of what and why we do what we do. And, my son's 6 years old and he's about to be 7. And, his soccer team, like I was just having a blast, like coming up with games to get them to
It's so
like,
much fun, right?
yeah. Oh yeah. Like games to not have them kick the ball in the middle on defense. Like, and
Yes.
all this. And I was like, I love this. And I was just thinking that
Yeah.
reiterated it to me, like I am born to do this. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
And it makes you a better coach too,
oh
right?
yeah.
Like you just see things, just like when you go and play sports again, you haven't played in forever. You kind of remember what it's like to play. Well, now you remember what it's like to just be a little kid
Oh yeah.
and just be out there and enjoying things and having fun. So sometimes I have to remember like not to adult,
Mhm.
like even now, Cade's baseball team, I help coach that. They're 11, or when he plays volleyball, they're 11. They have to remember like, hey, they're not 46. So,
Yeah.
make it fun, make it enjoyable. I don't know. But just being a positive impact has always been important to me. And I feel like it's my way of giving back.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, youth sports it's definitely been super rewarding.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, I'll close this out with before the lightning round because in
Yes.
honor of your lightning rounds, I had to throw that in there.
Yes.
I think I missed
Yes.
that
I love
last
it.
podcast with you. I was looking back at the last one we did. I was like, I didn't give him a lightning round. Like, what was I doing?
Oh, man.
But I did want to ask, especially as like running your podcast and where you are in your career, what are some of your own learning focus? Like what are some of the podcasts you really enjoy? I know we enjoy them all, right? But like the ones that's
Yeah.
like, yes,
Yeah.
I love this area of information. I really am enjoying learning more about this thing.
Yeah. So I don't know about you. I find I get very focused on like a topic and I'll like deep dive there. And then a lot of times too, that'll like coincide with who I'm bringing on my show.
Mm-hmm.
So like I had like calves and Achilles for a while. So I was like digging into that. And I think that's just an interesting area. In general, we talked about this before the show. I got to give you a shout out. Like I love this show. Like as a
Thank you.
podcaster, like I still go to your show because I feel like you have great guests. You're insightful. Like there's good back and forth. So I like your show. Another show that I've listened to more lately is Informed Performance.
Oh, cool.
I think they do a good job over there. And obviously they're more, at least the episodes I've listened to are more on like the medical, physical therapy side. But I mean, I'm a nerd. I like to listen to that stuff. And I think I listened to you and maybe did they bring Roman? Yeah, how is his last name? Tourleon? Is that?
Oh yeah, dude,
Yeah,
I should. It's true. I would butcher it. I think I tried to
yeah,
rehearse it like 5 times before I said it
yeah,
for my pre-roll. But yeah, that's pretty close.
yeah. Tourleon, whatever. Like I just
Yeah.
I a lot of times I'll go through phases. Sometimes I listen to Jake Tura too because
Yeah.
he's like the tendon guy now, basically. But yeah, I just like to listen to other people's stuff. But in a lot of cases, I've thought a lot about this. I kind of think of what we do as music, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
listen to musicians talk about other musicians, it's like,
Yeah.
oh man, I like this guy and this guy. And you use that for like inspiration. So that's kind of how I use this. And it's like I'm always listening to other people and trying to synthesize, taking what I'm learning, coaching and on the floor. And then I'm always trying to just adapt and evolve what I do. Right. Like I think if you go listen to the best tendon people, that should change in some way how you think about tendons, right? Or if
Mm.
you listen to the best foot people, okay, well, that's something I hadn't thought about. How can I integrate that into what I'm doing? But I'm always taking that and using it as inspiration to try and make what I'm doing better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always enjoyable too. I've heard that, like, I think it was Cal Newport. He talks about, well, you become passionate about what you do and become good at. And so if you're
Yes.
working through different podcast topics, then you will by default become passionate about those.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really helpful for my own learning process to the point that I almost couldn't imagine where I would be unless I was, I guess, forced, because I do put a podcast of my own out
Yeah.
every week. This one, like
Yep.
to go in and study those things and to read books I wouldn't have read and do those things. So I'm right,
Yeah. I
right
think
there
if
with you
you're
on that
if you take it serious, yeah, like there was, hey, I want to talk to Ebony Rio. Well, great. I better listen to
one.
some Ebony Rio podcasts because she's really sharp and I don't want to sound like an idiot when we do this
Mhm.
show. So makes you do some homework, dig a little bit deeper, and then I think you just ask better questions. Like that's always one of my things too.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody comes on, I want to try and ask them one or two questions that nobody's asked them before. Because
Yeah.
as a guest, you would hate to answer the same 10 questions every time you go on a show, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think that's a definitive skill, I think, in, not that this is a podcast about podcasting, but I think that's
Yeah.
an important skill in that
Yeah.
world without question.
I
Um,
agree.
So the lightning round, the one I should have
Let's
got
go.
to you to you last time.
No, you're good.
So I have 5 questions. The first is,
Yeah.
having worked with a wide variety of athletes yourself, Is there a sport that you didn't play growing up that, working with a particular athlete or population, or maybe having a little immersion in that sport, that you wish you would have?
So full disclosure, small city, went to a small school. So I got exposed and got to play a lot of stuff, but I wish I would have gotten to play soccer beyond like second or third grade. I feel like I could have been pretty good at it. For whatever reason, I have some natural inclination to that. And then obviously, I spent a lot of time in soccer. I spent like a decade where that was a big chunk of my business and what I did. But I felt like had I played longer, I could have been more successful, right? It took me a while to understand the game and understand, like the nuances in the culture. I feel like if I could have played that more, I could have been an even better soccer coach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a great sport too, from both that perspective of, like, Lee Taft talks about, if you don't play soccer, you should play at some point just for the foot element, and then
yes,
and then like just the spacing, and like I don't know this stuff, but like rondos and like how you set up a field and invasion, like I feel like that's so valuable too, like just from just being a better coach at some point as well,
Yeah, I mean, like you said, from both sides, like the foot-eye coordination, I don't know any other sport that gives you that, and then almost every great sport helps you understand like spacing, right? And if you understand spacing, like I try and explain this to my daughter all the time. Hey, if you can understand spacing, you can go play soccer, you can play basketball, you can play football, lacrosse, like almost any field sport. If you understand spacing, you can have a certain level of success just by understanding spacing and gameplay and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Number 2 here is what I just kind of chuckle myself asking this. But what is your relationship with caffeine like as a gym owner, podcaster, dad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? How does that play a role in your daily routine?
It waxes and wanes. I will tell you that this time of year, it's definitely higher, but nowhere near peak usage. The worst days were when I did in-home and I was, up at 4:45, or when we opened the gym, right? You're up at 4:45 in the car at 5:30 at somebody's house, 5:45 or 6. This time of year is a little bit more because, I'm layering in more coaching on top of all of the other things. And hey, man, there's plenty of nights where, all right, I got to go coach Cade baseball team till 9:00. But it is definitely less now than it was in the past, but it's not as low as it would be in, say, October, when there's not a lot of coaching and not a lot of extracurricular activities going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm kind of getting more curious. I think I get down on myself sometimes for what I feel like is drinking a lot of caffeine. But I also think Voltaire, like the philosopher, I heard like drink 100 cups a day. So I'm like, well, I'm not.
Oh my gosh,
I'm not on that. I'm not on that level, I guess. I don't know. It was just curiosity, without question. So. All right. So next question here is your favorite non-lifting / training hobby. If you have time for any of those. I don't know.
If you follow me on IG here lately, I've been playing more Fortnite. Cade's 11. And so like he's into video games. So I would say it gives us something to do together, but we get angry. I don't know how. We're both like really pretty good. Like he's better than I am, of course. We're pretty good as solos, but when we play together, like for whatever reason, we're not good. So we're trying to figure that out. But that's one thing that I try and do for myself. I think hand-eye coordination, right? Just reaction time, because you got to be fast. It gives me some relatability because, again, when I coach 11-year-old boys,
that's true.
They don't, like there's a kid that I coach in volleyball, and he wanted nothing to do with me. And then like 2 sessions ago, I was like, dog, have you played this new Star Wars season of Fortnite yet? And he looked at me like I had 3 eyes. He's like, I was like, no, it just came out today. So literally 2 nights later, he's like, yo, have you played that? He wanted nothing to do with me the first 4 weeks, but then he finds out I play Fortnite. He's talking to me about it. So it's like, again, I just keep coming back to ways you can make yourself relatable, and it gets harder as you get older, right? But try and find ways to stay relatable, and it's fun. It's like the one thing I get to do for myself.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think about Nick Winkelman had talked about with analogies, like understanding what the athlete base likes. What are they into? What interests them, and using that to help drive visualization and analogies. I am, even with my own kids, I'm at that point where I've been thinking about all right, when's the time to get a video game system? Like my oldest is 8, gonna be 9. I was like, and just like playing Mario Kart as a family, I was like, I feel like there's a lot of obviously mixed opinions all over the place on video games, but they can bring people together in a way that it's hard to get other things in life and like using it for that. So and plus like Mario Kart was always my thing. So
it's fun.
I keep thinking about when I'm going to finally pull the trigger on getting that for my family and having that family game night.
Yeah. As long as there's boundaries, right? This is what we talk about all the time. Like, hey man, especially like if the weather's cruddy. I mean, you live in Cincinnati?
Yeah.
I live in Indianapolis. Like, hey man, the weather's not perfect year round. We don't live in LA. So, cold, rainy day. Okay, sometimes that's fine. In the summer, hey, it's really hot. Okay, we'll spend some time outside and then come in and you can cool off and play this. Like, I think it's like anything else, right? In moderation with some boundaries, it's something fun to do and just got to find that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm on a little bit of a track with this one. I had asked Jeremy Frisch this question, but your favorite music for your own training and lifting. I know people talk about letting athletes listen to what they want to or whatever, but what do you like to listen to when you train?
Like back in the day when I was powerlifting, it was always like hard rock mostly. Like Metallica, AC/DC, all of those things. Except Deadlift Day, for whatever reason, Deadlift Day was like 50 Cent. Because 50 was like coming on at that point in time. And so there was something about that, but mostly like hip hop now. And I also, you got to understand, in the gym, I don't always get full rights to the aux. So sometimes other people are going to take over. And as long as it's fast and upbeat, I mean, I'm fine. As long as we're not listening to something sad or country or whiny, I'm generally going to be fine with it.
Yeah. It's funny. I was having this conversation a little bit with DJ Murakami, who was saying, as we get older, we do tend to mellow out and it turns into like EDM for some people or rhythmic more. It just becomes, for me, without question, like I actually, on the app that I get workout mixes from, it's called Rock My Run. It just has everything on a steady BPM, but like there's some harder rock stuff on there. And when I put it on, it's almost it feels nostalgic actually at this point to me. Yeah, I still appreciate it, but it's definitely a little different place as you get a little bit older.
Yeah. I don't need just like the aggressively loud, angry music anymore, but probably coincides with the lack of heavy strength training too. I'm not trying to squat or deadlift 500 pounds on any given day anymore either.
Yeah, for sure. Different goals and different time of life. I wrote this question down because I think you had asked it a lot, but I'm like, this question is probably a lot different if you're 30 versus 46 or whatever. But it's and you could, it could be what was a big happening in the past year, but what's next for Mike Robertson? Like, what are some big projects or a big project or things that you're onto right now?
Yeah. So I'd say two things. Number one, just really locking in. Like I've been doing the basketball thing like as kind of like almost my full-time coaching for like 8 years now. I've always had basketball, but like just being okay with like that's like 90% of who I train at this point, at least in the gym, right? Just continuing to refine that. And just, I don't know, man, I still love coaching all those basic things. I still love, teaching people, hey man, here's how a good hip turn should feel. But then like integrating the sports science into that has been really fun for me. Like you, right? Like you kind of have to stay switched on. And so that's been fun for me is like, hey, look, let's look at this guy's CMJ curve. Let's look at how he compares at 15 to a Division I player because he wants to play Division I. Now, how do we create that program? So stuff like that is really fun. So just continuing to dive in there. And then I can definitely see myself in the next year kind of just rebuilding the system. So obviously I've got the complete coach cert that I've sold for probably 6 or 7 years now, but just what I do continues to adapt and evolve. And so I think I've got some better ways to describe things. We talked about it a little bit today, breaking in propulsion and how I think about movement. So I think some of those things are really relevant, really valuable, and will help explain better why some of the things that I do in the gym allow people to have success. And so I can definitely see myself once I get through, August, September, we get these athletes back into school and training camps and all that, then I can see myself having some time and really being able to flesh that out. Because as you know, trying to take like everything that's in your head and then put it into a product takes a lot of work. But
big time.
I need some space and some lead time to build that out. But I can definitely see myself working on that in the next 6 to 12 months.
Cool. Yeah, those things are always like an anchor because you're always thinking anything new you learn or you start to work with, you're like, oh, how could I put it back into that, like I know for myself, it's very similar. So,
well, yeah, because you're always creating stuff, right?
Yeah. Trying to keep track of my brain has been an interesting, I won't get carried. AI, I've been using this Otter AI that transcribes your voice and has action points. I'm like, this is sweet. Cause like, it's just trying to use things to rein my brain and creativity, and has been an interesting process. But
well, I may need some tips on that. Cause for me right now, it's just Apple Notes.
Yeah.
Right. Cause I've got it on every device. When I have a thought, I've just got this like MR model and system, put it in there somewhere. And then as I have time, just trying to slowly kind of build it out, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Those projects, they're always so rewarding at the end to see, the end of all these thoughts that got condensed into, something that's a little more, I guess I could just say on paper, but something that's a little more process oriented and formal in nature.
Yeah.
So.
It's just streamlined, right? It's all these crazy thoughts, and you've taken the time to like streamline it, organize it, and just make it like digestible by another human versus just these monkey thoughts that are going on in my brain all day. So,
yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much. It's been such a long time. So it was great having you back on. I know it's like, man, how much stuff is there to talk about and cover since podcast, I believe it was 70. So it was great catching up again. And thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.